Hello and welcome to Circle Passages and Higher Ground. Again, I think I say this all the time, sorry to be redundant, but I think we have a cool show today, and not really guests, but this is our circle. Heather, Jordan, and Buck. So like we were talking about before, and I know we did a show a few weeks ago, hasn't been aired yet, but about crisis. And we'll probably refer to some of what we had talked about there, but it's like today, really talking about crisis and what we've discovered. You mentioned that a long time ago as far as another meaning to that. I mean, when we hear crisis, we usually think, something really negative, something awful, but it also means
opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a buzzword you were saying. Of course, it's a therapeutic reference because it's such a great reframe. And so I was calling my dad, who speaks Chinese and is a student of the language and culture. And so what I was realizing is, Albert Einstein and John Kennedy popularized it as a trope, but it's a turning point. So crisis, the second of the two Chinese characters that make up the word as we would think of it, is we think of it as opportunity, but it's really, they call it a change point, and I like it as a turning point because it works with our circle. And the revolution, that essentially it's a return, that it's a turning point in terms of us seeing things and doing things differently. And that's what I think is at the heart of Rite of Passage, and that dark night of the soul, which I know we'll also look at, that's so present in the circle when you're going through the Rite of Passage and the power circle, and especially that last night as you theoretically can be up. I don't know if you guys were up, but drumming or rattle or whatever you do in your power circle to really usher in the dawn, that reminded me of that turning point and the opportunity in crisis to really transform.
And it's kind of it's a great way to really look at it, because again, you just hear crisis and typically it's just, wow, something's awful is going on, right? Or something happened. But then like you said, to really look at it, and when I was looking it up too, and I don't know if it was Cantonese or Mandarin, but Chinese, and it was, because I'm sure that makes a difference for them for sure, but it was crisis equals danger and opportunity. So there's the danger part, there's the negative part, let's say, but and opportunity. And I know used to look at that a lot of times too with working with youth, it seems like tough situation that they're in, but this is really, if you can look at it that way, it's really a great opportunity. And we'll see as we're moving along how it becomes an opportunity. Because again, right away it's like, well, wait a minute here.
It doesn't feel like an opportunity.
Really, yes, yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah, I always joke it's the gift that you're tempted to return to the sender, but it's probably the gift that you really need,
And there's the opportunity, right? The crisis was presented or is presented, and so what am I going to do with that? Am I just going to roll over, or am I going to try to do something about this? And going back to the kind of the therapeutic mode, I think, and I kind of have this pet peeve of, in a therapeutic sense, of the DSM talking about disorders.
Right.
And one that's always really bothered me is PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, if you look at the first two of those, the traumatic and the stress, that's already enough right there. Now you want to call it a disorder too?
Right.
Come on. Back off here a little bit, but
right.
But having a diagnosis, in other words, and with that, how can we start working with that so we become more familiar with that for yourself. And then as we gain more knowledge, what does that allow us to do, right? Is kind of work through it. So it doesn't become so much a disorder anymore. Yeah, there are some challenges, but it's figuring out ways to work around that, navigate. So, a lot of that terminology you would use a lot, and don't let it get you. Not have to rely on medication to get me through it. It's how else can I do it? So just one example of taking crisis and really how can we really work with that and so it's not so much a crisis anymore.
Yeah. I think that's a great example. I mean, it really highlights a lot of the points of what we're talking about here of, in that, like we're saying, PTSD is a great example. It's super difficult. I mean, it's going to be I hesitate to use the word terrible, but it's going to be a really difficult experience in a lot of ways. But one of the things I'm thinking about as you're saying that is I think in all types of crisis, it's kind of like we're talking about, I think in those hard situations you tend to, I feel like you find the best in people maybe, or maybe you find the best and the worst in people, who knows. But yeah, I think, even like the crisis, all sorts of crises that we're experiencing right now, I think they tend to, as you move through them and, even if you hit a low point and you grow from it and you tend to, I truly believe, and maybe this is me being optimistic, that that's kind of how you experience the best in people is, you have to do something difficult and uncomfortable to really grow. And typically I find you grow the most when you do something uncomfortable. Brings me back to, I guess this is my own personal example, but even on the Rite of Passage we did, I had all sorts of hesitancies, and not that I'm making it about myself, but I think oftentimes that happens to people in life, things that feel difficult, that are uncomfortable, we hesitate from and we shy away from. And even if we're not avoiding the crisis, we could even just be prolonging the crisis, but we don't want to really deal with it. Like one of the things we're going to talk about a lot here today, like we're talking about, is mental health crisis. And avoiding it isn't making it better, it's making it worse in reality. And so even though the tendency is maybe to shy away from it at first, and I don't want to deal with that seems so heavy and deep, I find that, you just grow so much when you actually address those things and you work towards solving all those things. And, it could be any of the different things we're talking about, but I think even though it's difficult, I just think people, I've said it a bunch of times now, I think people grow the most from those difficult situations. And I think you have to really dive into the heart of the problem. Like anytime you grow, I think human beings grow from, whether it's working through your own insecurities or something difficult that you have to do, like a task. I think you get the best out of yourself when you really dive headfirst into it, even though it's going to be difficult and it's going to be uncomfortable, like all these things we're talking about, PTSD. But the solution comes from through the difficult work, like you said, dark night of the soul. I think sometimes you have to go to those dark places, those difficult places that are uncomfortable, to really come out the other side and to flourish anew. And I think that's kind of what we as a people are experiencing, is a little bit of that dark times, that low point, but also I think a little bit of that hesitancy to really deal with it. And I think the dark time, it's not going to be fun, it's not going to be amazing, but it kind of is what it is. And I think the hesitancy to really address the problem head on is one of the things, we're here talking about and trying to get people to do a little more of.
You use the term a lot of times when we've done other shows and just in general, but to be your authentic self. Yeah. So, taking on that crisis, if you can be your authentic self, you're going to be in a sense, challenging whatever that crisis is for you, right? And like you said, it's no pain, that old saying, no pain, no gain, is you're going to have to experience some of that downside, the pain, hopefully working to, okay, I feel better now because I really understand the situation a little bit better. I understand myself a little bit better. So lots of different ways of not just that first hit of crisis. Wow, I don't want to deal with that.
One of the positive things that's kind of goofy and obvious is the rites of passage. We drive to get there. You're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So once you, like I know, George, you were referencing there'll be little threshold crossings about, do I want to go? Do I want to fast? Do I want to sleep out where there could be cougar? Like these little threshold crossings. But even once you get there, it's not like you're going to just hop in your car and be like, all right, I'm out of here. It's not that easy. But I like that it's this turning point, as it says in Crisis as Opportunity, because you really have to go through it. Like that dark night that you go through and you drum and you rattle or you whatever you do before the dawn, that's the turning point. And you only get there by going through it. And when you're talking about, the pathologizing and the diagnoses, disorder and dis-ease, we have ease and order are what we're going to. And, that's another expression of the darkness before the dawn. Things will make sense and our life, can find a new order. But we have to go through some of that disorder, dis-ease, some of those disses that we don't like before we get there.
Absolutely. In fact, with a couple coworkers, we were talking and did a show around that PTSD, and I suggested, can we change that to PTSJ? And one of the coworkers said, what are you talking about? I didn't think I heard you correctly, and I said, well, it's post-traumatic stress journey.
Yeah.
And that puts a whole different perspective on it, right? And I think that a lot of times is what I've noticed is it's the perspective that we take about whatever it is, whatever the situation is, like the rites of passage in that Vision Quest. Well, that was right after the pandemic started last year, right? So yeah, there were some legitimate questions of, am I going to be safe?
Right.
And if I'm not, is somebody going to help me out, right? If something comes up. So, good question.
Yeah. And Joe, I want to touch on something you said, which is that, of course, you guys were going on your rite of passage as COVID hit. We've all been on a rite of passage and this night journey and this crisis. And what I really think is such an opportune moment, there's this concept of kairos, or the opportune moment that I think we're in right now, which is as we exit, as we go through to the dawn that's hopefully coming, that we really make sure we've mined our experience for gold, that we really go deep and go within and look at our experiences so that we can gain perspective from it. And that's what I think is our opportunity right now, is to really, we've been through a crisis, like it or not, kicking or screaming, we've been through a crisis. What can we mine from it? What can we bring out of it? And like the beginning of a rite of passage, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want to take with you as we exit this night journey? And that's what I think, we're at such a great moment for us to all consider, because everybody's been on a rites of passage this last year in some way, shape, or form.
That's true. And we've each mentioned that term, rites of passage. But if we could come back to, say, circle passages, and you've founded this, could you explain more? Because that's obviously directly related to rites of passage, right?
Yeah, so kind of what is rites of passage and what are we doing?
And about circle passages.
Yeah, so Circle Passages is really a modern rites of passage group where a circle, because circles are really how we move. There's an equality in the circle. We've all been in circle. There's really something like magic in a circle where people drop deep. There's an honesty. There's a transformation held in circles. Circles are an ancient symbol of wholeness and safety. And so that's part of what we're doing in Circle Passages. And we don't have rites of passage, as we've discussed. And then this last year, it was even more apparent. Here we have this pronounced crisis. We can't see each other. People don't go through graduation. They don't, even the semblance of rites of passage that we still have or had, we didn't have last year. So it's almost like we have this buildup of material to process. And so what Circle Passages, i.e., we have done, is created these containers. That's what a circle is, this alchemical container for transformation. That's what therapy is based on, the route to heal. And it really is about a safe container. And the idea is, of course, that nature helps provide that safe container. I was just looking at the statistics. Again, every mental health metric you can imagine is hit in nature, and physiological effects, biochemically, stress hormones, all different things are better in nature. And it allows us to really not be distracted by the lives we live and to see what is meaningful and valuable. And that, if I had to say one thing about what are rites of passage that we really need in our time, is we need a way forward. There's that statement, without vision, people perish. It's called a vision quest because we all need a vision, and we're leaving. That's why I think it's such a great time. We're leaving this crisis. What are we looking forward to? Where are we going? And implicit in that are, who are we? Where have we been? And that we can actually sever some of those ties. Part of it's almost like a second chance. You get to embark anew, take that opportunity and do it with intention and do it consciously so you can do it well.
That's pretty exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we were out on the land for 8 days last year, and you were there the year before. But just that whole time, and even when we've talked about this, the group that comes together, how amazing and how quick is. Let's drop all the defense mechanisms, all those facades, and get right to here's what's going on. With each one of us to be so open and sharing. That was probably the biggest takeaway is so quickly that we're able to do that.
Yeah.
And sorry.
I was just going to say, we've done it in different contexts too. So I've seen it time and again, which is kind of the magic, but it's not magic. Go ahead, George.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, no, exactly. I've experienced it. I actually am about to, I met someone recently who I think I'm going to actually start doing groups with young men, or he's leading it. I'm just going to be one of the young men. But it screams to me every time I experience that, whether it's with family members, whether it's with total strangers on a rites of passage, or kids that I've worked with at camps or a million different places. It screams to me that people just want that authentic, deep experience. And I think we have a society, not like, our society's got all this stuff, but we just don't drop deep, and we don't have those experiences. People don't like to be vulnerable. Even just saying that, being vulnerable has a negative connotation, I think, in our society generally. And that's not a good thing, in my opinion. And I just think that people, even though at face value when they're messing around with their friends, a lot of it, and it's okay, it's the way we live our lives, not everything can be this super deep, rich experience, but I think people crave that even if they don't know it. That's one of the things I take away constantly from those experiences is sometimes I'll even come into it and be like, I'm tired, I don't know if I want to do this right now, I'm hungry, I haven't done this, whatever. And you just almost always, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like, it makes me think of, like in yoga, I do some yoga, and it's like breath is so much of it. And it's revitalizing having that experience. Not just yourself and when you talk, but even when you're just sitting and watching other people, you could be, have the 5 or 10 minutes in a circle where I'm not even saying anything to anybody, I'm just watching. It's so refreshing to see people actually want to be deep in a way where, like saying vulnerability, in a way where, it's not just like we're talking about some cool, deep political thing, and that's not all surface level either, but it is more so than, it's really like people being vulnerable in really difficult, maybe doesn't even feel like the right word, but ways that are uncomfortable, like we're talking about earlier. I think you grow the most from things that are uncomfortable and don't come supernaturally, like you have to almost make yourself do it. And then once you get into that groove, I don't know, it blows me away constantly that people are so ready to have these really deep, vulnerable experiences where they're sharing these really intimate parts of themselves, and they're just so ready to do it. And I think even kids, I see it with kids, it's the same kind of thing. And I just don't think we have enough opportunities in our society to have those really open conversations, where we're even just asking, how are you doing? How are you doing? And being really real, like, not just like, oh, how are you? How's your day been? Like, oh, good. But like actually being there and being ready for them to say, I'm doing really bad. Like I've been really struggling with these things, and it's really hard for me, and I really could use some support, and I don't know how to go forward or whatever it is. I'm making things up, but I just think there's so much value in those really vulnerable experiences. And to circle back to the way I started, I just think people, even if they don't know it, they like crave that. And they might even think that they don't, but I have almost never seen anybody kind of be in that experience and not, even if they don't share themselves, you can just see how much people take from it, even just watching other people do it. So I just think we have a desperate need for more of that in our society, and you can see it every time you do it.
And one of the things that we did talk about recently was the crisis with students, right?
Yeah.
And actually, some of the research really started with, or it looked like it did, students who were having suicidal ideation and suicidal tendencies or attempts, and actually, unfortunately, doing it. And we thought it was around the virtual learning. That's what I think what was initially reported. But then fairly recently, another study and some other research came out where it was the pressure that students were having to perform and to succeed, and especially, let's say, like the seniors, who a lot of competition going into college, I need to get accepted. Yeah. And it was kind of interesting looking at this article about that's where the students were coming from, feeling this pressure to perform. And when the researchers asked the parents, it's, well, what we're most important, what's important to us is our children or our child's health and safety and happiness. Nothing to do with this pressure. So it was kind of on a few different levels. Here's what the teens are seeing and what they're feeling, and what the parents are actually seeing. And I know we've talked a little bit about that too, as far as a lot of times parents will think, well, you hear these things, it's like a third higher than it was pre-pandemic of the suicide attempts. But that's not my child. Right? That's the kind of thing that, well, it's somebody's child, and just not acknowledging that's a tough one. But
I know when we talked about that in that statistic, I used to, back in the day, coach soccer at a couple of the different high schools. And that's what I always did. I was presumably supposed to be doing visioning and, about how to strike a ball or winning or something like that, And we were just doing basic self-acceptance and stress relief. And because even back then, and I know the statistics are significantly worse now, but even back then, I had all the, what you might call high achieving, varsity. They all had, 3.5 or above. So you could look at them and you might say, there's nothing wrong with this group. They were dying of pressure. They had so much anxiety. And there was that disconnect between that you're referring to with the parents and what the youth were perceiving. And that's what rites of passage do, whether you do it individually or you can do it as a family. Jordan and I have done a couple as family. You cut to the quick, and you get to, what really matters. What is our relationship? You say the things that as I told my sister, you wish you would say before you died. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we can go through our lives and avoid these deep conversations and these intimate experiences that we all crave, but somehow we're just, even with the best of intentions, we're missing each other. And the last point I'll make is my friend Yvonne, who's part of our circle, her doctoral dissertation was on suicide prevention. And I listened to her data, and it was from the last 5 years. I was just staggered by the implications. So it's something like 25% pre-pandemic are not at risk in some way, shape, or form of high school students for suicidal ideation or attempts. And I just thought, this is a mental health crisis, but we should really just stop. We should almost just stop and pause and take it in and then and change that turning point, that change point. Like, we need to change, because the crisis is like this impending, I don't want to be, it's like doom. To me, it's so unacceptable to continue without that change that the crisis invokes. So that's my plea to parents of there are so many things to do, and it's so unacceptable, and it's even if it is someone else's child, which it statistically isn't, it's still a youth, like we're looking at our youth who are statistically at high risk, and for all of us collectively, that should be a crisis that we're unwilling to endure without that turning point, that change.
Yeah, there's so much that I think of during what you guys are both saying there. I think two things. One, you talk about the pressure, Buck, and I think there's just, we live in such a complex society. There's so many things going on all the time, and I think it's easy to feel pressure just from a million different directions, and I think it happens to people of all ages, and maybe young people are just ill-equipped because they just don't have as many tools. But there's so many things. It makes me think of, I'm not on it a whole ton, but even things like social media, like, you could have pressure over your grades or over, like you said, athletics. You could have a lot of people, I think, they just are constantly, then they don't even realize that they're comparing their lives to other people. But just being on social media and seeing the way people interact and all sorts of stuff, I think, there's so much pressure, and you're constantly looking at other people's lives in a way that isn't really realistic even. Like people don't present, like, I'm not on social media, but theoretically, like if I were to be on social media, the version of me that exists there, that's not even really me. That's like, me in the best lighting with the best, with like the best outfit or whatever the heck it is. And so I think that creates this tendency where people are on social media and they're looking at everybody around them, and they have this weird misconception where they're like, I don't know, they're like over-exaggerating how good everybody else has it almost in this weird kind of way. And that's only a surface level because there's not a lot of emotion or whatever involved in social media. But I think it does have this tendency where people, it's like the opposite of gratitude. Like you got your gratitude sign right there, which I love. But it's almost like the opposite of that, where people, without even realizing that they're doing it, they're focusing on all the things they don't have. And I think that has a tendency to also have hugely negative implications, where people, you focus on the things you don't have, and then you ask yourself, why don't you have them? And then often I think the answer for a lot of people is, I'm not good enough, or I'm not working hard enough, or I just have these problems, like doctors, maybe somebody tells them they're ADHD, and they're like, well, I'm ADHD, and so that's why I don't have all this stuff that this person on social media has. And I know that they wouldn't literally say it that way, but I think subconsciously that's almost what's happening is you start to feel like you're not good enough because you don't have the things that these other people don't even really have. They just are acting like they do. And then the second piece I was going to say, which is kind of related, kind of not, but just talking with the relationship between parents and kids, I think it just makes me think of almost, what I was saying a second ago is I just don't think people have enough of those conversations where they're being really real with each other in ways that are uncomfortable. Like parents don't want to talk to kids about their mental health issues, and maybe they even would say that they do, but statistically they don't. They don't do it as much as they should. And I'm not a parent, and I'm not going to claim that I would be some great parent or anything like that. I'm not, and so I can't necessarily understand what it's like to have a kid in certain ways, but I do think it's just, you could just look at it black and white. People aren't having those conversations with their kids to the extent that they maybe should be. And so I almost feel part of it is, I feel like I'm just repeating myself from what I said earlier, but people need to be more willing to just sit and have conversations and actually like ask their child how they're doing, and not just like, how was school today? Good. I had a test. How'd you do? I got a B+. That's awesome. And then we finish eating dinner. But like, how have you been feeling recently? Like, I know that, what is it like to not be at school in a physical way? What's it like to not see your friends for an extended period, or, to just feel isolated? I just don't think, again, it's not like I'm going to every American household and quizzing them on how much they talk to their kids, but like we're saying, from the statistics that you just see everywhere, especially if you're focusing on mental health, it's just so glaringly obvious that more of those conversations need to happen. And, it's almost like I'm pleading, like you said, Mom. It's not like I'm going to force anybody to do this, but it's almost like, what in the world and again, I have no judgment for anybody. It's not like I'm trying to be negative or anything, but what in the world could be more important to you than your kid, than your child, or than your family in general? This doesn't have to be about a parent-child relationship. This could be about your sibling that you know is struggling. It could be about your best friend that you know is struggling. It could be about any of these things. And it's just, I don't know, it's like I'm pleading. It's like, what would it be like to not have that person? What would it be like for that person to actually take their own life, or to just not be in your life anymore? And I think that reality is, maybe it's too real that people just don't even really want to think about it, and they don't even really want to accept that that is a possibility. But if you do, and you actually sit with it, I mean, it's like I would do it, it's like you'd do anything to not let that happen. You'd, swim to the end of the earth or whatever. So I almost just, it feels like we're pleading with people, but it's like, it's like, what in the world could be more important than this? I'd rather be poor in my 70s and have a great relationship with all of my loved ones and be healthy and all those things. And not that everybody needs to have my priorities, but I almost refuse to believe that this isn't their priority. I think, again, it's like you might grow, you might even know that you're going to grow from this experience, but it's still just so uncomfortable, and people don't. And there's all these weird complexes built into families, and all sorts of stuff, and people have insecurities and all this stuff. And I understand that it can be really difficult. That's why we're trying to provide resources where people can do it and not have to, take it on themselves in a vacuum. There's all sorts of ways you can do it, but it just makes me think like there's nothing that's more important than this. So why, what needs to happen for people to want to have more of these conversations? And it might never be want to, but what will spur you to have this conversation? And maybe it's just actually realizing what's at risk. And I also think, as a final point, I just don't think people realize how much is at risk. I think if you said a lot of these statistics to a lot of parents, like I coach a soccer team, I've worked with kids a lot at camps and stuff, and even if they knew these stats, I don't think a lot of people are consciously thinking about them all the time on a day-to-day basis. Not that anybody is on a day-to-day basis, but if people were thinking about them more, it's hard for me to even imagine how they wouldn't be like gung-ho, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to do something about this, especially with their own family members.
And that's a piece right there that you talk about with the family, and I think that's the unspoken crisis that's going on, is in the family, of recognizing that my children aren't doing quite, they don't really know them, because the pace of our society too, right? And you just were talking about siblings and the, let's say the youth themselves, but what about the parents that have been out of work? Everything's been upside down, right? So, but again, kind of like an unspoken crisis of that family piece. And I think we're rites of passage individually, and that's where it's going to start anyway, right? That journey, but it's to also bring that into the family unit so everybody's on the same page. We kind of, like you said, you really dropped in when you've done some family work that, it's incredible, isn't it? Things that I didn't know about my family before, and you think, well, wait a minute, we're together every day, but...
Yeah, it kind of blows your mind. And George, when you were talking, one of the statistics we saw was that 50% of youth who are really at risk with suicidal ideation won't talk about it, which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know there's the campaign in England, how are you? Ask again, how are you? Because they've found that, it's almost compensatory, like the face we have outward. Like there's that joker that's outwardly jovial and laughing and inwardly in pain. And so the beauty of the rites of passage is usually they're long enough where you get past that first, how are you, blah, 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 whatever the pat answer is, and the silence and the reluctance to speak. And you sit with each other and you get to the deep answers. And I mean, the couple experiences I've had was the last one we did, which was with extended family. I mean, I cried so hard. I was just like, I was exhausted. Don't run away. But I mean, it was like everybody said everything that literally, if the world ended the next day, it would be like, thank God we did that. And so that's the part too that I guess people think it's hard, but it's not hard. And we don't want it, but we deeply want it, you know? And so part of it is when you get in these situations, also they're natural. Like they seem unnatural in the modern society because somehow we don't have community and family in the same way, but they're actually deeply natural. It's really how we've moved perennially through the ages. It's just not how we move in this moment.
You know, it kind of reminds me of something I've been hearing and seeing lately, and it's probably more in the indigenous, but not, probably in other circumstances too, but it's storytellers. You know, it's almost like even within the family unit, everybody's in separate rooms, they're all on their own gadgets of whatever it might be, but of having that together time. So when those gadgets aren't available, let's say, how do we continue the story? You know, the history of who this family is, for example. But that conversation doesn't seem to be happening. And I think that's what, from when I first got to know you, of reviving the rites of passage that have been kind of laid to the I don't know where they went, but they're just not really being practiced as they could be, and it seems like the need is there.
Yeah, and I know you guys know this, but that, you know, your grandfather, my father, did a doctoral degree on the lack of rites of passage, and he was working at a school for troubled youth at the time. And, you know, people probably don't know this, but I dropped out of high school because I was depressed. You know, so part of what we offer is our own paths that we've found, our own ways through our own rites of passage. But because I'm going to say they're sleeping, Buck. and that we all have stories. You know, one of the things from my doctoral degree is that, you know, you tell your story. And I just taught at Evergreen, and it was on the hero's journey, where you study a little bit about your family. What is your ancestry? What's the story, your family's story, and your personal story? Like, and your story could include all that self-talk of whatever it is, you know, but to tell stories, and then also to realize the stories that we're already telling ourselves.
Definitely. So hopefully what, you know, because we're talking about a lot of stuff that, wow, that sounds pretty concerning. It's although we've woven that in there too, of so what can we do about that? How can we help remedy this, or, you know, kind of ease it, like you said, to accept the pain. Know that there is going to be that, or some discomfort, but hopefully I'm going to be a better person at when I'm finished with this process, right? And it's an ongoing process anyway. But
yeah, I think it makes me think sometime soon in here I plan on doing a little talk about it. It makes me think of, I think what you can get out of it is, I just don't even think people realize that their life could be, it sounds generic to say your life could be better, but that you'll come out the other side of this having grown and having, in my experience, more love and gratitude than you had previously before you even went through that difficult experience. And it'd be hard for me to explain really quickly, I guess, and I'll maybe do a talk on it at some point, but I think of happiness almost as like this, you know, like a chart that you're moving up and down, and you have these high points and you have these low points. You know, like the coolest experience you ever had and the worst experience you ever had. And I think, just if I were explaining it in 2 minutes, I think our society has a tendency to try and have the highest high point possible, like
all the time,
all the time, and you know, like the cool party that you see in a music video or whatever it is, people having the greatest time ever, and what the like, you know, terms and conditions or whatever at the little bottom of the screen that you, in small font, that you don't realize is that with each of these like peaks come the valleys, and so that you know, the more you search for this like high point where everything's amazing and you're like, you know, it's having an awesome time, the more you're going to experience these low points. And I think, again, if I was trying to explain it quickly, I think our society has a tendency to push us towards that happy point. Like the pursuit of happiness, like just trying to have this great experience, like you said, all the time. Like if that was the goal, if the peak was the goal all the time, we'd all just wake up and take Molly every day. It'd be awesome. But you can't. You'd hit this massive low point. And so I say all that to say what I think you can get from the other side of this rite of passage or of this dark night of the soul or this personal journey that you go through is the way my goal, or what I think the goal is not just this peaks and valleys on a chart, and it's hard to see it without the chart, but understanding that the whole chart can get moved up, if that makes sense. And I know I'm explaining it with no visuals, so it's hard to see it.
You got these.
But yeah, you see my hands. But the way I understand it is the whole chart gets moved up. And like in my personal experience, I struggled with mental health stuff and depression, and for me, it literally feels like the whole chart is moving up. So even the low points feel better than they did before. You don't feel as low. And I just describe that happening with, it's stop pursuing happiness quite so much and start pursuing love and gratitude, things that are unconditional. Because, you look at the chart and it's like happiness and sadness, happiness is great, but they're both fleeting. You could be happy for a moment and that's awesome. And I'm not saying don't be happy, be super happy. But realistically, it's like the things that are going to stay there, that are going to be unconditional, are love and gratitude. Like, I have 2 brothers. I could be super annoyed with my brothers, but I love them. That's unconditional. So this happy, sad, how happy or sad am I with them is, it's life. That's what it is, and we're all going to live on that roller coaster. But the more you can try and grow that love and gratitude and really build that up, I think and again, I know it's not a perfect metaphor without visuals, but I literally feel like your emotional roller coaster just gets moved up. Like your high points are higher and your low points are higher. And so I just think, a super long way of explaining, I think what you can really get out of this, and I know we've been talking about all these things that seem dark and sad and depressing, suicidality going up, suicide ideation going up, all these things. But when we talk about crisis being opportunity, one of the things I think about more than anything is that I truly believe that if we put the energy in where we need to and we work on solving these problems, we as a society, as a community, as a people are all going to be happier and have more gratitude and fulfillment and love than we did before. So I actually, even though a lot of these things are a huge bummer and we're trying to work on them as much as we can, one of the things that gives me optimism is I truly believe that it's going to spur us to take the actions that are long-term in the next 50, 100 years, going to make all of us just, have more love and just, I don't want to say better people, because what does it mean to be a better person? But it's going to make us all lead better lives. And so that's when I really think about the opportunity in this crisis, I think more than anything about, this could push us to take the actions that will make us all better off, 10 years, 20 years down the line. And so, like you're saying, a lot of this stuff is not awesome, and it's things that we really need to work on. But I really do think there's so much opportunity in terms of if none of these bad things were happening, I think that there'd be a tendency to just status quo and just kind of keep going in the direction we've been going. And so for me, even though these things aren't good things, I look at them really, like we're saying, as opportunity where we could be better off for them if we put the energy in where we really need to. So it makes me optimistic in that it could make us all better off, but it's going to take energy and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of intention and all those things. But like you're saying, if we were trying to send a message out that was relatively positive, even, it would be, if we put the energy in the right places, we could all be better off than if none of these bad things had happened in the first place. And so, there is optimism to be found there if you look for it, I guess.
So actually, if you would, on that note, how about if we wrap up? Because that's what I was kind of hoping we could do is, where's the hope?
Yeah.
But thank you both very much. This was, it always is fabulous, but
yeah, thank you,
certainly
Beck, as
today.
always.
So it's always an opportunity, right?
every moment of every day.
For sure. Well, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again. Thank you.